Hey folks, we're going to talk about some of the HVAC tools, your air conditioning tools. And I'm not going to go deep into the heating tools. I'll get into that when we go into our heating section, but we'll get started right now. So here we go. All right, so on your air conditioning tools, we really get into some of the, I'm going to start talking about the basic tools that just for air conditioning. And like I said before, we'll use, we'll get it when we get into our section on heating. I'll get into some more tools on that end of it too. And they kind of all blend together a little later in the class. So first of all, you can either go digital, you can go into the old analog gauge sets, or our analog gauge set is like this. So we're going to have a low side and a high side. There was earlier on, we would actually use a third gauge, and that was some of our Chrysler products that we had back quite a few years ago. When I first started getting into air conditioning. One of the things that's really kind of nice, and I didn't even put a slide on that, I'll see if I can find one, but some of the systems we'd use, like on buses, it's kind of hard to really do kind of, you'd have to have multiple gauge sets to do that. But we have a capability that we can actually do gauge sets that are remote driven too. So you could actually be up in the cab while the transmitter is way back in the back where all the where the compressor and all like that is too. So there's also that type of one too. Some of them are Bluetooth, some of them are actually go into Wi-Fi, but those are kind of really uncommon. But you need a good gauge set. You can use your analog ones; it'll work just fine. And you can actually you have a couple different types of options out there. You can use just on the machine. I'll get into the machines a little bit here too. Or if you're just doing a performance test, we can actually just use a set of gauges. We go that way. And there's all kinds of different fittings with EPA's SNAP program, and it's regulated that every gas must have its own type of fittings to it. So I put up two different styles right here, and also put down some adapters, and I want to have a little sidebar on the adapters themselves. We when R12, which is this type of fitting over here, we would have a screw-on type fitting, and you could lose a certain amount of refrigerant by removing and installing. It was just a nature of that type of fitting. When they went into 134A, they went more of a quick connect. So it doesn't really have the refrigerant loss as we were doing with the fittings before. So this was a kind of an upgrade to it. You could get into on some of the fittings, you can actually have a turn valve on some of the older fittings too. And that was either an add-on part of a kit or something like that. But one of the things I'm really, not a fan of, let's put it that way, is these adapters. Now you could actually get adapters going from to an old R12 gauge set over to a quick connect, like on your 134A. So you can actually have one gauge set doing both gases. And the problem with that is then you can actually have cross contamination. In other words, you would have, it wouldn't be a whole lot, but it'd be enough that it could actually cause a problem. So you put an adapter kit onto your old R12 gauge set, and you would actually have some cross contamination inside the hoses and stuff like that too. So I'm not like I said, I'm not a big fan of it. I do have a set of that we had back years ago, but I usually used it for the angle degrees on my R12 set and have it a little bit flexible. Never really got into changing it over to the different fitting types. And of course, you need to have some kind of good thermometer. You're going to use a good thermometer on different parts of it. You know, of course, some people call the old turkey thermometers, but you need to have a good thermometer for the dash, of course, or you can actually have a infrared type thermometer, which also with the infrared thermometer, you can actually go a little bit farther with it. You can actually check line temperatures. You can check the condenser temperatures too, and you can actually be outside the car and actually go and point it right at the registers too, and get pretty close on that. So a good temperature gauge is really an actual temperature of some kind of a temperature thermometer or gauge or an infrared. It really is a great part of the tools that you're going to need to have. The other thing too is, and I'll really get into this a little bit later on when we get into identifying the refrigerant. This is important, and why I say that's important because you always want to check to make sure that the refrigerant that's in the system that you're going to be working on is the refrigerant that you're supposed to have in it. And make sure it's 100%. Of course, you might have a little bit of air in it, but the big problem is cross contamination. Again, some non-reputable vendors of the refrigerants will blend stuff in, and we had a rash of on the R12 back early on, that they were actually putting propane in it. Propane is a good way of gas for cooling, but propane is also very explosive and flammable. So this is one of the things that you want to make sure you have some kind of good identifier. Some machines, they actually have an identifier built into them too. But if you have a cross-contaminated gas, you need to use, and I'll show you in a little bit, a scavenger that actually takes it out, and then you're going to dispose of it properly. Also, some kind of a mechanism for checking actually leaks. One way is to actually use some kind of a dye or a leak detector. I'll bring on a leak detector as we go along a little later on. So with the dyes, you can actually inject a small amount of dye into the system, let it run through for a while, and then you can use your little high intensity light to check for leaks. With usually you have a set of classes that go with it too. On our compressors, we have specialized compressor tools for pulling the actual clutch mechanism off. You'll have some snap ring pliers for shaking and putting in seals and all. And then you're going to have specialized clutch tools and compressor tools too. So there's going to be specialized to make sure you get the, like the clutch mechanism off, or taking the seals out of the actual compressor for resealing and all too. Then of course we have specialized tools for some of the fittings for the lines, and then also you're going to have, this is like a master kit, you might say, and this can actually be used a lot of times for some of your fuel systems too. And then if you're going to be the one to actually make hoses too, So you may want to make your own hoses. You can get the hydraulics types, and you can also get just the mechanical type hose builders. There are a bunch of different ones out there that you can actually buy. And of course, if you want to really do a good job, you're going to actually have to have some kind of a machine of some kind. Some of the Robinair is one of the big producers of machines. There's a Max Cool also that's out there. You can actually do with a gauge set, which, here we have a little gauge set on this particular one. This will do the evaporating charge too. You can actually have a small guy with a cylinder that holds your refrigerant in to actually, use to actually evacuate and charge back up too. Or you can have one of the rolling machines to actually go ahead and use them for diagnostics and a little bit like that too. And I've actually seen some people use a bottle type like this, and then they'll actually just use a vacuum pump, which can be done, but it's not. You'll also need a scale. That's the other thing where you're going to actually have to have a scale on this type of machine, whereas this machine has a scale all inclusive, and will actually recycle, kind of clean up the gas too, like that too. And then, of course, we're going beyond. So you're going to have things like a scan tool. Sometimes in some of the processes, you're going to have a scan tool to diagnose some of the sensors and stuff like that. Or you may even have to use sometimes, even some of the communications you can use an actual lab scope in it. So this is actually a crafting meter here. So, the basic type tools, you're going to also have to have your sockets, your wrenches. Again, you're going to have like your line wrenches. You're going to use a regular DVOM, digital volt ohm meter on for some of the sensors and stuff. And that's going to be pretty much the biggest part. You're going to have some basics, but I just wanted to touch on some of the other tools in the air conditioning world too. So just a quick little one on different types of tools in the air conditioning world. This is just some of the basics. There's some extra tools you might need depending on the make, model, and the particular car you're working on. All right, so this is where I'm going to go ahead and stop at this point. And when we get back, we'll start talking about other types of things for air conditioning on this air conditioning series. Bye for now.